Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I welcome you and please join me in welcoming Mr. Sandeep Dayal. He is known as a strategist and a marketing leader in the world of advanced branding sciences. His latest book, Between the Years, is also very popular. It's one of the best sellers. And we would like to have the best of the time that he's given us for this evening for us. It's evening in India. So let's make the best use of this time. I will give a brief introduction of the speaker and then I'll request Mr. Sandeep to straight away get into this talk. Sir, you have your PPT with you or how is it going to be?
Yeah, I will. You can go ahead with the introduction. I'll have the PPT ready in a second here.
Fantastic. This is called WiseViews Leadership Conversations and we take pleasure in announcing that this is the 64th leadership conversation that we are hosting every Friday without any interruption. We have been hosting these conversations on the platform called ICFAI Online. And these sessions are attended largely by working professionals from all domains. They hail from many cities and towns in the country and some of the cities abroad as well, from US, UK and other countries. So today we have Mr. Sandeep Dayal. He's going to talk about building iconic brands by applying new advances in brain sciences. And we have scheduled an hour for this. The 1 hour that we will have first 20-25 minutes is a talk by the speaker, followed by another 30 minutes, 40 minutes of Q&A. This is Mr. Sandeep Dayal for you. He's the Managing Director for Cerenti Marketing Group based at Chicago. It's a strategy consulting firm. He has worked with many of the world's top companies to build some of the greatest and best known brands. His clients include global players like Conagra, Kraft, Abbott, Philips, Unilever, Pfizer, AbbVie, Baxter, Scotia Bank, Banco Santander, BMO, HSBC, Visa, and MasterCard. Very, very prestigious list. Mr. Dayal is regarded as one of the leading minds in marketing strategy and has co-authored articles in marketing management, McKinsey Quarterly, and strategy and business. Mr. Dayal has been a visionary in predicting how marketing would change over the years, and his articles have been cited more than 200 times by other researchers and authors. Under his leadership, the firm has been named to the Forbes list of America's top consulting firms for each of the prior 6 years for its work in marketing. Phenomenal this is. Mr. Dayal is the author of the latest bestseller, Right Between the Years, How to Use Brain Science to Build Epic Brands. Mr. Dayal has a bachelor's degree in engineering from the prestigious BITS Pilani in India and an MBA from, again, a prestigious school, Yale School of Management in the USA. He lives in Chicago with his wife. So this is a brief profile to an iconic leader that we have today with us. I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you will definitely jot down your questions in addition to whatever you have given already and be ready to actually pose those questions in the chat box. And we will request you to raise your hand when it is the Q&A session time. Now, thank you very much, sir, for sparing this time for us. On behalf of ICFAI Group and all the participants, I take it as a privilege and pleasure to welcome you to this leadership conversation. And I hand it over to you to start your talk. Welcome and thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rao. This is indeed a real pleasure for me to be talking to your audience at ICFAI. I thought what I would do, let me just make sure that I can share my screen and all of that is working. And then what I can do is maybe share a few slides just to set up this conversation. And then we could go and get into just an open discussion with you, the panel, as well as some of the audience. So let me just make sure all that is working here. So I go to this. Perfect, perfect. So I don't see you guys anymore, but I'll just go through it. And if you need to stop me, just speak up because I'm not seeing your picture anymore.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll get going on this. Thank you.
Okay, super. So what what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of an introduction to what I call cognitive branding, and my sound and my voice is coming through clearly.
Perfect.
Perfect, perfect. Okay. So, here's the book. It was 2 years in the making. And very interestingly, when you write a book now, it so happens that young people sort of pick up your book and they create all this artwork. So all these pictures that you're looking at here were created by various people that I don't know and put up on Instagram. And so you can see how marketing is changing, where other people also do interesting things with your product and put it out there. So that's what the book looks like. And some young people went ahead and created all these images. So I thought I would share those with you. And the book is available on Amazon for those of you who would like to get it, as well as in some of the bookstores. So, what is it that we're talking about? So, there's something, so the book is called Right Between the Years, How to Use Brain Science to Build Epic Brands. And there's no such thing per se as brain science, but I use that term brain science to refer to a number of things that are going on these days, which includes things like cognitive psychology, behavioral science. It includes things like social psychology, anthropology, and so on. But the common element in all of these things is that people are looking to and trying to understand how the human brain works. And they're coming at it from all of these different angles. And I should also mention neuroscience, of course. And over the last 20 years, as a result of that, we have a lot of great understanding of how the human brain works, much more than we had ever in the past century. So what that has done is it is changing many different sciences like public policy. It is changing, for example, things like economics and cognitive behavioral therapy. So all these fields are changing. And what I did was, in my work, I started looking at how these applications and how this new knowledge could be applied to the area of marketing, and more specifically brands, because in marketing, branding is the biggest thing that you do, really. So right between the years, so what are we really talking about? So if you look at it, sometimes psychologists like to point out that everything about sex happens not where you think, but right between your ears. And what I like to say is that everything about branding and everything about marketing, but particularly everything about branding, happens right between your ears. And what do we mean by that? Which is that when we think about brands, we think about billboards, we think about television ads and all of those things, and we think about shelf space where products sit. But nonetheless, all of that information, if you ask yourself, look, where is that information really processed? It's processed right between your ears by your brain. And it is whatever your brain makes of that information, that is what your brand is going to be. That's what the brand perception is going to be. And you start asking then the question that what is a brand? And, with brand, it used to be that we would say, hey, brand is all about product differentiation, which is what you see on the left side here, right? So which is, how is my product? It was very simple. You would say, how is my product different from my competitors? And then you would just, put that into your branding statement that this is, what my product is about. But really, when you go from the new world, which is where it's not so much about product differentiation, but it is about brand differentiation. And the brand is our perception of the product. And every product has something that you could think of as a soul. There is the seen and the unseen parts of the product. And that is what the combination of that seen and unseen part is what becomes your brand. It's the perception of your past experiences and harbored fantasies. What do I mean by that? So I said that everything that you perceive about the brand happens in your brain. And when you start thinking about what is it that is in your brain, there are only two different things that are in your brain. One is your memory of your past experiences. And the second thing is whatever fantasies you have, right? So it's only those two things, experiences and fantasies. And cognitive brands are all about tapping into those experiences and fantasies, and they work the way the brain does. So, I'm not going to bore you guys a lot with the theory, but that is very simply the theory behind all of this. So here's an example just to sort of clear up, what do I mean by this? This is a picture of the old monk rum. And you might, and many of you might be familiar with it and what have you. And the reason that I bring this up is that this bottle of rum encompasses a lot of different memories for me personally. For those of you that don't know, and it was mentioned in the background here right now, I got my engineering degree in BITS Pilani. And in BITS, in Pilani, what used to happen is that, when we were in college, we'd go through all of these very difficult tests. It's a very serious place in many ways. And, the educational program there is very serious and very difficult, or at least it was for me. And you go through all of these difficult test series twice a year. So I'm recalling something that's many decades back. And then, everybody would have a difficult time. And when all the tests were over, then we would sit back and then just sort of, pull out a bucket and make this punch, which was made of this particular rum, some fruit juices and this and that. And we just have a lot of fun. So when I look at this bottle of rum, there are a lot of memories for me of my friends and the kind of relief and the kind of joy that we would have just to celebrate the end of those series. So when I look at this bottle of rum, it's very different for me versus looking at any other bottle of rum. This good as this rum is, by the way, if we put it in blind taste tests against rums from Jamaica and Dominican Republic and so on, I'm not sure it would win any competitions. But nonetheless, for me, this is kind of the best rum in the world because it encompasses all those memories. So that goes back to what you were talking about, which is that when I look at this thing, this is more than just a bottle of rum. It is all of those memories and all of those fun times that I recall. And for me, that's what this brand becomes. So that's what I mean by how a product can specifically tap into people's memories and tap into their experiences. And so you can ask yourself, does Old Monk have a soul? And for me, it does. And that is what it's all about. So with that, I'm going to go very briefly into what cognitive brands are and how they're architected and how that's different from what traditional branding used to be. So traditional branding, for those of you who have gone into brands, as I've mentioned before, is more like about product differentiation. Of course, people have added to traditional branding things like emotional benefits, but that's not what I'm talking about here. This is what you see in cognitive branding is not just functional branding combined with emotional branding. And what does that all mean for those of you who may not be familiar with those terms? Essentially, what people do is that when you're trying to design a brand, you look at what are objectively the benefits that the brand has. So if you're looking at a car, you might say, hey, the car is faster, it is quieter, and all those. Those are all functional attributes. And that's all fine. And then people also try to attribute some emotional benefits to those things. And they will say, oh, okay, the car makes me, gives me a thrill when I'm driving fast and so on. So there's that emotion of thrill that I'm going to attach with it. So they would do something with thrill and speed and make a brand statement out of it. And that would become functional plus emotional branding. And that's how it has been for the last 20 years. But now we've moved beyond that. Like I said, we've moved beyond just thinking of functional benefits and emotional benefits to experiences and experiences and fantasies. So when you look at these brands which are tapping into your past experiences, those brands have these three types of attributes. Not all brands have to have all three attributes, but these are the different things that can be as components in those types of brands. So I call it brand vibes, brand sense, and brand resolve. Brand vibes is something that where the consumer is asking the question, does this brand give me a good vibe? Which means, okay, do I feel like a connection with it? Do I feel like a social, do I feel like I have a common chemistry with this brand? And I'm going to give you guys some examples of each of these three things so that it becomes a little clearer. So, you don't have to remember all this. Brand senses, does it make sense to me? And these days we know that the brands that are brain make sense either by system 1 or system 2. Those are two different ways in which brands work. And I will speak to that in just a second, but they are just very simply instinctive sense and deliberative sense. And then finally, does this brand make me happier? So, when these three things happen, or any one of these things happen, the brand starts to gain power and becomes a cognitive brand. So let's take a look at that first thing. What is that brand vibe? So as I mentioned, this is about someone feeling a connection to something. Just as I adjusted it as an example, I told you that I feel that connection to that bottle of Old Monk rum to that brand. There's some chemistry, there is that empathetic connection. So this is about, do I feel like this brand understands how I feel? All right, and I'll give you an example. One of the first examples that came out, this is about 15, 20 years back now, which is Dove soap. And Dove launched what was called this Real Beauty campaign. And what they understood when they did market research at that time was that they figured out that women were feeling particularly disenchanted with beauty products, particularly disconnected with beauty products, because beauty products always had these perfectly thin women, almost anorexic, that were on their ads. And women would look at those ads and they would see all these perfect models, and they would feel actually worse about their own bodies, because normal women and the average woman doesn't look like that model. So they would look at those models and they would say, hey, I can never be like that. So what Dove did was that they started putting billboards like this all over the country, where they had women who were more normal. Some women were fair, some women were dark, some women were dusky, some women were heavier weight. And so they started putting more the kind of women that you might see at your workplace with your friends and so on, the normal women versus those super thin models. And women responded to these ads so beautifully. I mean, they felt so connected. They felt like this brand really understood how they were being actually put down by those other brands. And they connected to this. Now, mind you, in many of these campaigns that they did, in many of these billboards, they looked exactly like this, where it just said Dove. It didn't talk about what the Dove soap did. They didn't talk about, hey, the soap is creamier, it'll clean better, any of those things, which is what traditionally you would do in product differentiation. They just had Dove, and they just had Real Beauty, and they had different women's, and different billboards featured different kind of women. And it made this soap, without even saying anything about the product, it made this soap the #1 in its category in many parts of the world, not just in the United States, but in places like Brazil, even in India, it does well, and so on. So that is an example of where you tap into people's angst and you tap into a connection, and it makes your brand very big. And it's very different from traditional branding, where you'd be talking about really how clean your soap was, or how much moisture, how it would moisturize your skin, or something like that. I'm going to skip this one. It's another example of that ad, but just from pharma. But let's look at this. This is from Tanishq, which is one of my favorite brands. And we're going to watch a little bit of this, a longish ad, but we'll just watch a little bit of it, and just few things I'm going to point out in this ad, which is also a great example of how Tanishq created what I would call a brand with empathy, which is one form of a vibe. And let's watch this for a second. Hopefully you guys will be able to see the video.
I'm Tom Reber with the Contractor Fight and Contractor Fight TV. Contractor spend.
All right, here we go. And I'll just stop it for a second. You guys were able to see that and hear it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. I will play it now. As you can see, even as the ad is starting out, I'll just show you some of the differences that have taken place in the markets, which is, you look at this woman who's the star of this ad, and you can see she's more dusky. She's more a normal woman figure, which has become very important, because we found that people connect with these ads when you show more normal people in some of these things and not unrealistic models. So that is, you can see that already in this first clip, but here we go. Let's play that.
To those who live in their little bubble that a girl can't juggle between the office and the home because they think it'll be such a struggle. Well, it's the last thing on my mind. And how some colleagues get a kick by shooting their mouth too quick.
Hey, I got promoted.
About how I'm getting ahead just because I'm a chick. It's the last thing on my mind.
So, I won't go through the whole ad. You can watch it on YouTube and all of that stuff. But I think what is important about this ad is that Tanishq realized that, and this, by the way, this is their brand of jewelry, which is targeted at working women. And what they found in their research in looking at working women was that very often women were being put down at work, in the sense that people would say, hey, you're getting ahead in life, not because you're so talented and so on, but because you're a woman. And this type of attitude and this type of thing is something that, gets the goat of women, and they need to, and they wanted that acknowledged, that they are getting ahead not because they're women, but because they are talented and they're accomplishing unique things. And so in this ad, Tanishq very much plays up on that whole attitude and ties into that angst and becomes a preferred brand for working women. Now you can see in that ad that the different places you could see the jewelry pieces and all of that stuff also, but they're really not talking about the jewelry piece itself, which is what you would do in traditional branding, where you would be talking about how the jewelry is better designed or more attractive, but they're just talking about acknowledging the fact and making that empathetic connection that they understand that women are being put down at work in different ways, right? So that is a great example of an empathetic ad which is being run in India itself. And this, by the way, which is two of a kind, makes a beautiful pair. Again, it's a social chemistry connection, where the brand is actually acknowledging the LGBTQ, the lesbians and homosexuals and things like that, and understanding that with that language that they've used, it's a nod to the LGBTQ community, which is another thing that many different brands have started to doing. So these are examples of how brands are working in many different ways in the modern branding world and becoming leading players. And as you know, Tanishq is the #1 jewelry brand and possibly the only national jewelry brand in India. Okay, I'm going to skip. No, actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to just real quick show this one also. This is another ad that you are familiar with. This is a slightly different thing. There you saw brands with empathy. This one is something that's called brands with values. And this is where the brand makes the connection with people by sharing their values, by saying, hey, what you believe to be right and wrong is what I also believe to be right and wrong. And I share your values. And that makes a different kind of a connection with people. Let's take a real quick look at this ad also. It's a wonderful ad. You guys are all familiar with it.
Yes, sir.
नमस्कार।
अरे सर को नमस्कार करो।
मैं आपका वोट मांगने आया हूँ।
अरे आइए ना सर, बैठिए। रामू काका, सर के लिए भी एक चाय। अच्छा सर, वैसे मतलब आपका
भंवरलाल भंडारी।
और क्वालिफिकेशन?
चलिए
छोड़िए, अपना वर्क एक्सपीरियंस बताइए।
25 साल से हैं इस लाइन में।
सर वर्क एक्सपीरियंस मतलब कंस्ट्रक्शन, वाटर वर्क्स, इंजीनियरिंग।
अच्छा, हमारा इंटरव्यू ले रहे हो क्या?
सर इतनी बड़ी जॉब के लिए अप्लाई किया आपने?
कौन सा जॉब?
देश को चलाने का जॉब सर। खैर, चाय लीजिए।
हर सुबह सिर्फ उठो मत। टाटा टी।
So that's
Yes, sir.
yeah. Okay. So that's another fantastic example of what I called brands with values. And here, what the brand Tata Tea realized was that we all in the country, in the country of India, are frustrated with these unqualified, corrupt politicians. And what the brand did was to sort of tap into that angst that people have and be on the side of the people by saying, don't just rise up, but awaken, which is that whole idea of jagore, right? Which is, do something, whatever you can as a citizen, and don't accept all of this sense of entitlement that politicians in India have and what have you. So this is kind of what, where a brand actually comes to you and says that, look, we share in the same values that you have, which is to be anti-corruption and holding politicians accountable. So this is an example of a brand with values. Brand with values and brands with empathy, like you've seen in both of these examples, are actually from the Tata company, which I think does a wonderful job of marketing for their different brands, where they're doing very non-traditional cognitive branding in the way that it's supposed to be done. Now I'm going to move on to that second piece of branding, which is around System 1. And as I mentioned before, this is around brand sense, really, where a consumer looks at something, a product that is offered to them, and they say, hey, does this thing make sense to me? And it's a very simple question, but when you start thinking about, what makes sense to you, what has been found by science, by psychologists, by neuroscientists, and so on, is that you make sense of the world, you make choices in the world 95% of the time instinctively. Think about that. 95% of the time, you're not choosing things by, being very rational and saying, hey, is A better than B? Is B better than C? But you're just going with your gut. You're going with your instinct. And that instinct piece of it is called System 1 by a very famous psychologist called Daniel Kahneman, who also won a Nobel Prize, as you guys know. His book is called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which I highly recommend. If you guys haven't read, you should read it. But nonetheless, this is about, excuse me, my thing went back for some reason. So this is Daniel Kahneman. This is what he looks like. You can read his book. It's Instinctive Decision-Making and Deliberative Decision-Making. I'm obviously simplifying something that he has, elaborated over 500 pages. But for the purposes of your practical work, think of it as just those two things: gut feel decision-making and deliberative decision-making. So System 1 is that gut feel decision-making. So this is when you look at a brand, it makes sense to you because really it aligns broadly with what your beliefs already are, with what you throughout your life have believed to be the case. And, when we talked about experiences earlier, think of it this way. What happens is that when you go through your life, your five senses are observing different things that are going on in the world. And all of that stuff is going into your brain. Now, your brain doesn't make an exact recording of those things. It's not like, scene by scene exact recording. What your brain does is that it takes those experiences and it makes learnings out of those things. And you start believing certain things. You have certain rules that you have in life, which is why when you're presented with a situation, you're able to make a quick instinctive or gut feel decision about certain things because it aligns with what your belief is. So, for example, if you have a belief, and I'll give you some examples of beliefs, but if you believe that simple is better, for example, simple things are better. So, people in India often say Sida Sasta Sundar, so if you believe something like that, then if anything is very simple and, good value, you will just automatically go for it because that is what is wired into your brain. It turns out that psychologists have actually done a lot of study and they have found what are called cognitive biases. So these are just beliefs that people commonly across the world have. And there are, something like 180 different cognitive biases which have been studied. In my book, I talk about 8 different biases, just by way of example, but also because I feel like those particular 8 ones are common in the world and that they are often usable in marketing. And for example, here's something that's an anchoring bias, which is that we don't have a way of judging things, the value of certain things in an absolute sense. Humans always need some kind of a reference point. So this is one of my clients, Conagra, and this is the #1 popcorn brand in many countries, I think, including in India, which is called Act 2. And all they did was that they realized that people have very positive memories of going to watch movies. They have a wonderful time and then they go there, they have popcorn, and the whole experience of enjoying, let's say, a James Bond movie, having popcorn and all that is all mixed together. So they came up with this brand. This is, many years old now, and it is called Movie Theater Butter. And you can see there are all kinds of visual cues on this brand around how this thing is associated so closely with a theater production. So it's called Act 2. And you've got, this Hollywood type of sign there with these incandescent lamps. You've got this movie film running here. So it's very closely tied with this whole idea that you take this, put it into your microwave oven, and then within minutes, you're going to have this popcorn, which is beautiful popcorn, which just reminds you and makes you feel like you're watching that movie at home within minutes, sitting there with your family and so on. And, earlier times, it used to be the case. And this is a 15-year-old brand that people used to sit around on Fridays or Saturdays, around their TV and watch movies. So this brand, when you see this, just like I described that old monk, this brand immediately taps into that whole experience of movie theater watching and makes the brand more than just a tasty popcorn. Then there is this is that whole idea of making things simple that I mentioned earlier, which is called the Occam's razor bias. And what it says is that many people believe that given a choice of two things, the simpler answer is the better answer. Now, that may not always be true, by the way, but nonetheless, a lot of people have that whole mentality of Sida Sasta Sundar. That's the Occam's razor. Simpler answer is the better answer. So here, we have an office products brand in the United States called Staples, and they just have this easy button that they talk about. And they keep saying, things that their whole line was, that when life gets crazy, choose the easy button, right? And so this and that, just go and buy your things from Staples, and you don't need to analyze every single file folder and paper sheets and all of these things. Just go to Staples, and everything will make your life so much easier. So they used to have this whole campaign which was around, wouldn't it be nice if there was an easy button for life? Now there is one for your business, and that's Staples, and that was easy. So that was their whole line. So that's the whole thing about brands where you make decisions instinctively, and 95% of the time, you as the marketer want to have people decide to choose your product instinctively without even giving it much thought. And they will do that if it aligns with some learning like that Sida Sasta Sundar type of thing that they have in their life. And there are many such learnings that we form over life, which are just wired into our brain. And it's up to you as part of your research to discover some of those things. System 2 is a different way in which we make things. And this is particularly important if you come out with some kind of a product that is so different that people cannot tap into their experiences to find, to find that. So for example, when Uber first came out, and in India, I think you have a different company which does the same thing as Uber in terms of getting rides. But it was a very different way. We were used to just going and standing out in the street and hailing down a taxi, but Uber was a different kind of service where you could go on your smartphone, you could see the car coming to you, you could you didn't have to deal with, hey, is this guy going to take me to this place, or is he going to turn me down? Do I have to have the right change? Do I have to have the money? All those things went away. So it was a better system, but it was very different. So it wasn't that people right away took to it. So that is where you needed some deliberation and saying, hey, do I trust this? And this is a very different way of doing things. So in those instances, in those 5-10% of the cases, you may need people to actually rationally think through these things. It turns out that there are 8 different ways that I give in my book, which is to make people think about things in a different way. And those methods are mentioned here. The example that I gave you of Uber was what I call the no-brainer method, where, when you look at what the value that those car sharing rides bring is just so much better, right? So it's almost like saying, hey, I'd be silly not to be using those services. So it's like a no-brainer to use those services. So this is where you amplify the value of your brand so much that people say, hey, this is a no-brainer. I got to do this thing. And that's what Uber did. Here's another example, which is the reframing method, which is where you go and reframe how people think about a particular product. And in this case, I'm showing you the example of Patek Philippe, another luxury product brand. This is a brand of watches, which is sold all over the world. Now, if you think about it, no one should be actually buying a watch these days because, everybody has a smartphone, you see the time on it, and it's going to give you more accurate and better time than what you're going to get on any Patek Philippe watch. But guess what? These Patek Philippe watches cost anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, right? So why are people paying all this money? And what Patek Philippe did, it never spoke about the the accuracy of its watch. It never spoke about how beautiful a piece of jewelry it is and all of those things. But it said, this is really related to your legacy. So they're making you think about this product. They're reframing how you think about this product. And their campaigns typically have something like this, which is you never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. So what is it that they're doing? What they're doing here is that they're saying this watch is not really just a watch. It is really your legacy. This is something that is going to pass on to your future generation, that to your children, to your grandchildren, they're going to remember you. They're going to remember the success that you had in life, because this is a watch that actually encompasses all of that success that you've had. And it is going to be something that they remember you by. This is going to become part of your legacy. So, if you were going to give $50,000 to your grandkids anyways, this could be a wonderful way of giving them $50,000 in the form of this watch. So it is a legacy. So it's not a watch, it's a legacy. And they did this basic idea of a campaign of making you rethink how you should perceive their watch is something that they have done for the last 75 years in various forms. This is a much older ad that they have, which was around begin your own tradition. But the idea is the same. It's about that whole idea of it's not a watch, it's a legacy. So you can see how marketers have been very different in how they do these things. The last point I want to go through, and I know I'm going through these things very quickly, you can certainly get the book and go through these things at your pleasure, at your pace. But this is just to give you like a quick sense of it. The last piece of this is brand resolve. So there are two psychologists, Daisy and Ryan at the University of Rochester, who studied, what is it that drives people to intrinsic action? What is intrinsic motivation? Intrinsic motivation is things that you do yourself without somebody offering you an extrinsic benefit, like paying you to do it or offering you some kind of a reward to do something. This is thing you do just because of your own intrinsic belief. And we do things intrinsically, which is we do things ourselves with self-motivation when we feel like they're going to make us happy. So this is also another type of question, another framework that you can apply in brand resolve, which is to get people off that sense of indifference, because what sometimes happens is that you look at a brand, you say, it all makes sense, this is a better product and so on. But you know what, I'll wait, maybe I'll think about it. So it's that sense of indifference or its sense of delay and so on that where we sit on the fence and not take the decision to buy a product. Brand resolve is something that can get you there. And Daisy and Ryan essentially said that there are three types of things that make people intrinsically motivated. And one of those is having a sense of greater control, that is better autonomy, so to speak, that I feel like I'm free to do things. It's a sense of enhancing my own competence, so about my self-identity. And it's a sense of enhancing relationships. When those types of things happen, then we start sort of doing things intrinsically. We're motivated to do those things intrinsically. So MasterCard, had this whole campaign around priceless. And what it does is that this priceless campaign actually taps into your sense of relationships. So basically it says it's not about just this money that you're spending, but it is about what that money does for you in enhancing your relationship. So for example, the very first ad was around a father going to a baseball game. In India, it could be a cricket game, if you will. But they're spending, whatever, $2 on a hot dog, they're spending, $20 on the ticket, what have you. And, I'm just reeling out these figures, but it wasn't about the $2 and $20. It was about the experience or that moment that the father had with taking his son out for his first baseball game. So that's what was priceless, not the $20 or $2 or the hot dog or anything like that, but it was about that moment. And that sense of belonging, sense of relationship is an intrinsic motivation. I'm going to just show you one more example, and then we will open the session up for discussion. This is a particular problem that the U.S. Navy had, which is that, in the U.S., the Navy, as in India, is a volunteer thing. You join it. But they were finding that they were not being able to attract enough people to it. And what they wanted to do was to really have people feel intrinsically motivated to join the Navy. So what they did was that they sort of said that, look, when you join the Navy, it is more than about just, getting to, having a career. It is more that you will be changed by it. So remember what I said, an intrinsic motivation, one of the things there is people want to enhance their competence, build their self-identity. And this is what the Navy tapped into by saying that when you go to the Navy, you're going to be forged by the sea. And they had this ad in which you could see Navy people, using their skills in very different kinds of things. I'll show it to you in just in a video. And I won't play the whole video, but just maybe 30 seconds. So anyways, you get the idea, which is this whole notion of being forged by the sea. So this is not just about joining the Navy to have an income and to have a career, but it is that this is a place where you go, where you will be changed by the sea, changed by the Navy, and you'll become a different person than who you are. So this is what sort of then motivates people intrinsically, because think about it, people that are volunteering for the Navy are, putting their lives at risk, they're volunteering their life, so to speak. And this is something that was very successful in getting their applications up, getting people up so that they could feel like this is something that is going to be more than just a career. So, I know I've given you a lot of things here to think about. And these are the three different pieces that we just discussed in branding, which is around, you saw early on, just to summarize it, early on, you saw two types of brands, which are brands with empathy, brands with values. You saw Tata Tea's Tanishq, and you saw Tata Tea's, Tata Tea, and you saw Tata Tanishq. Those were two types of brands. Then you saw how brands can position themselves to tap into your beliefs and experiences, which is when they are instinctively chosen, that is a brand sense, or through deliberation, where, for example, a Patek Philippe goes to you and say, hey, it's not about a piece of jewelry or a piece of watch, it's about your legacy, to getting into things like brand resolve. So these are very different ideas, and it really takes time for these things to sink in. I just wanted to give you guys a taste of it, a flavor of it, so that you can then, start to deliberate on these things. I tell people to sort of get the book and then sort of read only one chapter a day, so that you can sort of read the chapter and then think about how it applies to the brands that you're working with. The part of branding that I didn't touch on at all right now today, which is sort of the second part of the book, is around executing this brand. So once you've designed a brand, you have to sort of execute those brands and create brand experiences. And again, brand experience is another area which is which has a lot of psychological things going on. So in the book, I talk about how your brand senses, how your sense of smell, sense of taste, and all of these things come into play. How do people really sense experiences? What parts of an experience matter, and so on. So there is a lot of discussion about brand experience and brand ethics and so on, but I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole separate hour that we would need to get into those things. But let me just take a step here and stop and bring you guys back into a discussion. So I'm going to just stop the share and then pick up the discussion with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And it's been very, very interesting in terms of the depth of the subject and also the breadth it covers. I think we need a little more time actually to learn into some of the basic concepts that you've been talking about. But personally, what I have been going through when you presented so many campaigns like Dow to Tanishq to the MasterCard campaign, Tata Tea, and also the other campaign that you mentioned about US Navy. I think across all these, the framework that you're talking about, how traditional branding has moved away from, say, excessive focus on product differentiation or functional attributes, a little bit of emotional benefits. That is one stage. Two, tapping into those fantasies and the past experiences and trying and connecting the way your brain would have loved to actually respond. And probably that's where we are. So beautiful. The concept and the framework has been very nicely explained, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it in the sense that I forgot that you had taken more time than that is available to all of us, but it's your time, sir. And from now, my clock ticks, so we will take probably another 30 minutes or 35 minutes, and I'll straight away get into the Q&A. I will not summarize it because it was crystal clear and very nice. So I'll save that much time. And I request Professor R. Prasad to join. We have these questions in about 3 to 4 clusters. These questions have been collected at the time of registration. Each and every participant had keyed in their question. So we have curated those questions and landscaped in a manner that is going to help us in a coherent conversation. So there's a first cluster which Professor Prasad is taking up, and after that I'll come into the second cluster, and then we probably see if we can go into the next cluster depending on these questions. While this is happening, ladies and gentlemen, I request you to raise your hand. Maybe at the time of second cluster, we will open the window for you and the mic. You can ask the question directly with the speaker. So while you are ready and you are jotting down all those things, we will get underway with the first cluster. Professor Prasad, I'll briefly introduce Professor Prasad. He's my esteemed colleague. He's a professor as well as director of academic wing at ICFAI Group. He heads the online MBA program, which we launched very recently and doing extremely well, appealing to all the working professionals. And Professor Prasad brings to the table a rich experience and a track record, a successful track record of 30 years of work at corporate level as an entrepreneur and into the world of academics. So Professor Prasad also holds his BTech from IIT Bombay and his PGDM from IIM Kolkata. So with this, I thank Professor Prasad and also welcome him. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Sir, it has been a journey to the stars. You have taken us to something that a lot of us will need to do a lot of reading in order to understand it in detail, but certainly the future from a very supply driven marketing approach where we had to sit in front of the TV and everybody watch the same thing to demand driven marketing. I think you have taken us on that journey. And I think there's a lot of us, for all of us to do in terms of understanding this much better. So we start with a question which is related to your background. In your journey across corporate, what are the motivating factors in marketing which has brought you to this kind of, very, very contemporary, very, very kind of data driven, plus the psychological aspect of it? Can you throw some light on that?
Yes, so happy to do that. So my journey in marketing has at this point, spanned 25 years or more. And really, it has crossed all of those things that you mentioned, Dr. Prasad, which is around looking at analytics, looking at functional and emotional branding and all of those different things. And those are all important things, by the way, and for marketers, you need to go through all of those different things. So everything that I talked about is not necessarily a replacement for any of those things, right? So there's always this value to good marketing research and so on. So my personal journey actually started long back when I was working at McKinsey, and we started looking at, we did all kinds of analyses and all of those things. And this is when maybe somewhere around 2000 and early 2000s, 2001, 2002, when the first internet boom was happening, right? And then the boom happened and then it exploded and everything went away and lots of businesses failed. And, we've gone through many of these different cycles. But at that same time, my personal discovery was at that time where I was looking at, hey, when that boom happened in the early 2000s, why did people not start buying groceries online, for example? Why wouldn't people start doing banking online? All those different things that we do routinely ourselves right now, we were finding in the first boom, people didn't actually do those things, and it didn't take off. And it sort of started that whole question in my mind, Dr. Prasad, at that time that, why is it that some things like internet banking and internet shopping, all these things that make so much sense, why are people not doing it? And so at that time, I started looking at more than just benefits to products and really understanding the psychology of the consumer. And it was a long journey. And just like you said, you have to, sort of study all of these things, because at the time that I went to my business school at Yale, they really weren't teaching that much psychology, in branding or in marketing that much. They would mention it. And then all of us assume because we are humans, we understand psychology, of course, because we understand ourselves. But that's not the case. You have to read, there are a lot of different advances that are taking place in psychology, which you have to then really understand and see how they're going to apply. So it's a long journey. It's a journey that I went through in my consulting business. I worked at McKinsey. I set up my own company, Cerenti. And throughout that time, we applied these principles to real world brands, and we made lots of mistakes, but we also got a lot of things right. And those are the kinds of things that from my journey that I described in the book. So it's a very different kind of a book. It's not an academic book. It is a book that describes my experiences with working with these brands and how I failed and how I succeeded. And I think that's just life, isn't it?
Thank you, sir. I think you have also brought in the holistic aspect that, there are lots of things, all of them are useful. Now, how do you put them all together and then get far more value than you were getting earlier, and that too in today's environment? So the next question is about part of the title. It's a very fast changing world. There's a lot of digital stuff happening. People are also talking about metaverse. It's just started. And in such a very, kind of VUCA environment, what does the concept of iconic brands mean into the future?
Right. So yes, I would make two comments there. One is that there is all this technology that is happening. There's also this, fractionation of channels that is happening. So you've got the internet, you've got mobile devices, you've got metaverse, you've got all kinds of things that are happening. However, the whole notion of branding is not going away. Branding is still, in my opinion, the most important thing that you do, right? So that whole notion of why people buy your product and how it makes sense to them, how they make a connection to it, is still there. The technology piece of it is just a way of communicating. It's a way of maybe placing those things out there. And it's a way of new way of delivering brand experiences in certain cases. But it is not a replacement for branding. So I think that is one thing that people should be very clear-eyed about, that yes, digital is very important. At the same time, it doesn't displace anything or take away anything from the importance of branding. The second comment that I would make is that the metaverse, in my personal view, is going to be a big deal. And why do I say that? Because metaverse ultimately is going to create this virtual reality and bring it to the masses. And as I mentioned, everything that we perceive about any product, about any brand, is really what is perceived by your brain. So if you're going to take a set of virtual head glasses and just wear them, and then you're into a different reality, then that is the reality that your brain is going to perceive. And right now it's kind of a little tacky because that it's not so real. But think about the first video games that came out. They were like Pac-Man and all these things, which now you would look at them and say, oh, that looks so old and so unrelatable. But the video games that you see today are so real. When you go to movies, you see CGI and all of that stuff. It's so real. You can believe that there are dinosaurs and so on. So as more and more of that virtual reality melds in your mind with actual reality, that's going to change a lot of things. And it's going to be a very important way that people are going to experience brands. And I think so brand experiences will change a lot as a result of specifically the metaverse.
Thank you, sir. I think what you have highlighted is that the 2 years and what is there between the 2 years will remain, and therefore branding will be sent at the center.
At the center, yeah,
the center.
absolutely. Particularly on the brand experience side, I think we are all experiencing a lot of technology and all of those things. Yeah.
And what technology will do is to execute it so you get to where you want to get.
Yeah, and it'll, like I said, it'll also change the experience itself, because you will see the world differently. You know, and in terms of, I think the technology piece is also changing our sense of brands, in the sense of, you know, we are more looking at peer reviews or connecting with other people. These are a little different, right? People, previously it was a one-way communication where the marketer would, you know, tell you certain things about their brands and you would kind of be having that. But now you can talk to other people that have bought that brand. And so all of those interactions are also taking place. So people are, it's that whole tension that is taking place where the marketers have more control because they understand more about your psychology, more about how your brain works, and they have more opportunities to play with that. At the same time, consumers are also in greater control because they can talk to each other, you know, and they can go on their mobile phone, they can go on, you know, get information from the internet on demand and so on. So all of that interaction is creating a very nice tension, I think, which will continue to advance the area of marketing, and you can never be standing still.
Absolutely. I think you've added the dimension of social, which is also adding value to the consumer and also enabling marketers to use it far more productively.
Yes,
I think you
yes.
also, yeah, yes. I think, you know, you also reinforce that old statement of perception as reality in the way the direction is going.
Absolutely, absolutely. Perception is reality. Perception is what creates the brand in our minds.
So the next question in your presentation, you have given us a number of wonderful applications. Can you give us 2 examples about how brain sciences, at the brain sciences side, help us differentiate between brand benefits and product attributes?
Yeah, and I think, you know, like we talked about, you know, everything is a function of how it is processed and believed by your brain. And so the examples that we discussed and went through earlier, I mean, in addition to that, also there are many other examples that you can look at. I have lately been actually quite fascinated with some of the brands, how they're using the human senses to actually to make an impression on you. So, for example, there's one ad which that we have in the United States, which is a company that sells online dog food, right? So you can go and buy dog food, and you just go in online, and it's like a subscription, and every week they send you a different package for your dog and what have you. But in the advertisement that they did, they actually didn't talk about the dog food at all. All they showed was this picture of all these different dogs, and you hear the sounds of the dogs slurping away their food. So the only thing you're hearing is the slurping of the food. And it's you know, if you've ever owned a dog as a pet, you know, and the dog is eating, there's a particular sound that they make as they're slurping in that food. And if they're, you know, going at it with a gusto, you can feel, it sort of makes you feel like, oh, the dog is really enjoying the food that I gave it, right? So they only had the sounds of all these different dogs that are slurping away their food. And that conveys the message that the food that they're sending is indeed very tasty and very, you know, good and healthy for your dog. So that's an example of another way in which marketers, without ever saying anything about their product, just by tickling that sense, because they know that sound means certain things to you, is they're being able to tap into this thing. MasterCard these days is doing a lot of work with you know, trying out sound and taste and all of these things, and trying to mix all those things into people's experiences, so that you will, once you start thinking in this particular framework, you will see examples of these things everywhere.
Absolutely. I think you added to our understanding of it. I think you've brought in the dimension of sensory marketing, and that feeling of the slurping of the dogs going in, and then adding memories, and then remembering you know, the kind of dogs that you had, that you have, and, you know, being with them at that particular point in time. I think you know, the sensory part of it is part of the brain science. And I think anyway, we'll have to read the book to get more.
Yes, yes. I mean, and I think that is something that brands are doing a lot of sensory marketing. There's actually a Martin Lindstrom has done a lot of work. He's written an entire book. I just have a chapter on sensory branding in my book, but Martin Lindstrom has written a whole book around this thing, and there are other people who have written just books around specific senses. So there's a lot of work there, and certainly modern day marketers need to be aware of these things.
Thank you, sir. The last question in this cluster is about the link between neuro-linguistic programming and neuroscience branding. Is there a link? Can you throw some light?
Neuro-linguistic programming. Tell me more. What is the, what do you mean by that?
This is a question from one of the audiences. This is some sort of a practice which has gained credence in the 1990s. It talks about, okay, if somebody else can do it, if I can follow the practices that that person is doing, then I can also do it. It talks about imagery senses and being able to generate energy and motivation using those image and senses. It also talks about how you can reduce the kind of picture that you have in your mind about things that make you stressful, and instead enlarge the kind of things that you have in your mind which are related to things productive, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. What I love about all these conversations with young people is that they're always one step ahead of me. And but certainly I think the kinds of concepts that you're talking about again, are very closely related with how things are processed in your brain, right? So I think in that sense, whatever that is in terms of new ideas of languages, new ways of communicating, those things are always going to be important. For example, since whenever branding began, brand logos have been very important, right? I mean, the logo communicates something to you, whether it's a Mercedes emblem, whether it's the Coke symbol, or whether it's the Nike swish. These are specific, if you will, neuro-linguistics. If you want to think of them that way, these are different languages. The apple, the apple with a little bite off it. These things have become so iconic and so associated, and they communicate something to us, from a brain perspective. By the way, I do want to mention that branding is something that is evolving, particularly for the young people that might be on the call today. You should learn about traditional, functional, and emotional branding. What my book describes as kind of advanced concepts in psychology and so on, which have to be layered on top of those things. It's not a replacement necessarily for those things. So people should learn about those things, and most likely when they go to work and they go and talk to their bosses, their bosses are probably just thinking in those traditional product differentiation, brand differentiation ways. And these ideas are just percolating into some places. Some companies like Tata's have been more advanced with it, but nonetheless, it is very important for the young people to be very familiar with both of these things. In the future, more of cognitive branding is going to be more and more the case. And therefore, it's very important to go in this direction. And these are the people that are going to lead that. But at this time, we sit at the divide where both things are there. And you got to be familiar with all of these different things.
Thank you, sir. I think you've given us some direction connecting NLP and cognitive marketing. With this, I hand it back to Professor Sudhakar Rao for the next cluster.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for handling these things so patiently. It's been foundational, let me say, with respect to the first set of questions. Your responses have been very, very useful. Now, I'll skip a lot of questions in the second cluster for want of time, and I'll ask just 3 questions or 2.5 questions. In the meantime, I request the participants to raise their hands. One of the hands has already gone up. Yes, I'll come to you. The first question is that there is this situation where this football star, rather superstar, Ronaldo, was appearing in front of the media and he elbowed out one of the cola brands. So the question is, how does one work on or arrest the fall of brand equity? Kindly excuse us for the usage of this terminology, but you get the sense of it. How does one alleviate the loss that has happened because a superstar has elbowed a sponsoring brand out in front of the media live? So what should those brands do later to actually gain back their position? So I think perhaps that's the question.
Yeah. No, I think so. And that's what makes brands interesting. That you have these types of things. These things happen, and whenever you're doing, superstar branding, you're sort of, relying on that whole notion that a person's brain is going to say, hey, if this superstar uses this brand, then I want to be close to this superstar. So, I feel closer to this superstar because I'm using the same brands that they're using. And that type of branding obviously comes with its risks, and many different brands have experienced that type of a mishap. So you're giving one example, but there are lots of examples where you have a superstar on your brand, and then that superstar does something that is unethical, or does something that is, shameful, or what have you, gets charged with sexual assault. You see all these types of things happening, and then you suddenly, brands have to step away. And at the same time, so I think, when those types of things happen, you have to be able to return to the essence of what your brands are about. So your brands are never about the that particular superstar, but really the brand is about what that superstar represents, right? And so, for example, Nike uses a lot of these performance brands, but the message has been that Nike is about, the sense of just do it, right? It is about the sense of people that are so charged by what they want to do in life that they pursue those ambitions, right? And then they would do, whatever, Michael Jordan shoes, and they would do other kinds of different superstar players. But that whole essence of that the brand is about people reaching and doing confidently what they truly believe in is what that brand essence is about. So okay, it is quite common, in fact, for superstars to do some things like that, which might give the brand a temporary setback. But if your brand is about a very specific idea, just like I pointed out in Nike, then you should be okay.
Okay, fair enough. I think what you're saying is that it's not a big deal, and it happens sometimes, and the risk is associated when you have bet on a superstar like that, and it is possible. And we should stick to the core essence of what this brand is all about. And I think we'll be back on track. So thank you very much, sir. The second and a very interesting question is, could you please let us know how we can build a brand in agricultural exports in Asia and Southeast Asia in the next, say, 10, 20 years? How can iconic branding be useful in food sector? Probably this is an associated question someone wanted to know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I mean, and as we know, many different countries do branding around their agricultural products, and I assume that is what this question is about. So, champagne, for example, is associated with a particular region. We have basmati rice, which is a very specific thing. We have, Parma ham and Parma cheese from Italy, which is associated, well, with the region of Parma. And, so you have all of these things which are very specifically agriculture, and it is very important, in fact, to do that branding, because otherwise, how are people going to distinguish rice that is grown in Texas from, true basmati rice, which might be coming from India, or, kesar, or something that might be coming from Kashmir, and so on. So creating that whole piece of branding, so that it's not just about talking about, how that saffron or something is different, but creating a whole experience around that, creating a whole, memories for people around how those things are very special is a big part of how you'd make those things distinctive in the world. So yes, do what champagne has done, do what Parma ham has done, do all of those different things to make your agricultural products, which are specific to the country, branded products.
Great. So what you suggest is that how beautifully this brand of foods or agri products create that appealing connect of your experience, of your location, of your region, because sometimes these are connected to your culture and heritage as well in some of these regions. For example, food or biryani on one hand, and certain other packaged foods in certain regions which are exclusive. I think that's a very nice solution that you've suggested. Thank you, sir. I'll now invite Shobhan Dhruva. Shobhan Dhruva has been typing in a lot. So I thought we'll request Shobhan to ask question. Go very specific to the question, Shobhan. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible?
You are.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is on brand vibes, being absolutely specific. Next door type of models, like you said in Dow, that's superb. Okay. I mean, when I saw the Dow ad, I was really excited long back because I spent 27 years in branding and marketing in reputed agencies of national and international repute. Okay. So now there is another thing which is happening in India is there are a lot of celebrity endorsements happening over non-performance brand. Okay, each brand performs in its own way, in a functional way, emotional way. But if you were to talk about the sports celebrities like endorsing Nikes or Adidas or anything like Michael Jordan, or even say the recent footballer example which was given. I'm talking about celebrities like Kareena Kapoor. I'm talking about celebrities like Deepika Padukone, who faces. I mean, so what is your take on those kind of celebrity endorsements? Since India has a lot of such ads. Personally, I'm not for that, but I want to know it with an open mind.
Yeah, no, and as we were discussing earlier, you have to be very clear-eyed about what your brand is about. And so in that sense, the celebrities, and there's nothing wrong with using celebrities to endorse your products, but the celebrities have to be aligned with what your brand is about, and not the other way around. Unless you're a very small brand, sometimes it happens that you're an unknown brand, completely unknown brand, you're a startup company and you manage to snag a Deepika Padukone, and suddenly you go from being unknown to being very much known. And there it's a little bit about branding, but it's more about getting get it right, being top of mind for people. Obviously, if Deepika Padukone is holding my book up in her hands, tomorrow the book will sell a lot, but that's just because she's famous and she's many places, people watch her closely. But really the issue is to be a serious brand, which is, Deepika Padukone is going to get old one day and she's not going to be representing your brand, even if she's representing it today. And you have to deal with that bigger question of what exactly is your brand about. Otherwise, is going to always rise and fall with that particular star. And we face this particular situation, and I mentioned this in the book, by the way. That is where I talk about a product called Pediasure, which this product had become huge in Indonesia because there was a child star who was a beautiful singer and that was endorsing it. But we always knew that child was not going to be a child always, right? And then we couldn't have an adult endorsing a product that was a nutrition product for people that are, for kids that are 1 to 10 years old. So we had to move on from that. So in that sense, we had to sort of struggle with what that brand was going to be all about beyond that particular star. So I think never lose sight of the fact that your brand has to be bigger than the star.
Fantastic. I think that's a beautiful statement. Your brand has to believe that it is bigger than the star who is endorsing. How simple and yet how profound it is. Oftentimes, we as consumers, some of us perceive that some of these stars are much bigger than the brand, like Amitabh Bachchan endorsing certain brands, or Deepika Padukone, or various other names that we have around the world. And we almost tempted to conclude that the brand is surviving just because of this. But the fact is, a quick visibility solution because of a superstar endorsing is a good yes, but to sustain your values when the star rises and falls, or the star does something which is wrong, as we dwelt in the previous question, the brand will have to focus on the core essence, what it is all about, and how it can actually live beyond all these things. That's a very, very beautiful and assuring answer. So thank you very much on that. I'll now invite Mr. Arun Kaul to raise his question. Over to you, Mr. Kaul.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, sir. And my question is about, you said that if you don't say anything about the product in your film or advertisement, I will first give you an example and then maybe I'll ask you the question. The example is that recently I saw a film in which they're talking about the relationship between a brother and a sister. The occasion is probably Rakhi, and the sister has made this milk pudding kheer, which the brother tastes, and he suddenly says that I am going to eat this whole thing. I'm not going to share it with you. Nobody can have it. Only I'll have it. Then, the sister discovers when she goes into the kitchen that she's put salt instead of powdered sugar in the kheer. And she understands why the brother is not letting her taste the kheer. So, it was a very beautifully done thing. And at the end of this, most people would have tears in their eyes. At least I had tears in my eyes. But what has happened is that it was such a beautifully done film. It was such a good advertisement, but I don't remember the product or the brand at all. I will remember this film for a very long time. In fact, all my life probably, that this is what happened. But I have no idea what was the product and what was the brand. So sometimes doesn't it happen that when you don't show your product or, have it in your face, that you spend so much money and yet people don't recognize your brand. I mean, don't remember your brand. The very objective gets defeated.
Yeah. So that is a very good and subtle point that you bring up, which also I discuss in my book. So when you do emotional branding, you have to be very careful. And I think that was, by the way, an Amazon ad. But nonetheless, I think when you do emotional branding, you have to be very careful, because what happens is that there's a psychological phenomena that is called focalizing. And when there's very strong emotions at play, people tend to think about the emotional story in a very strong way, and then everything else becomes incidental, right? And you need to make sure that your brand is actually woven into the story. So when you saw the Tata ads that I was showing you, for example, around Mia, yes, they were talking about this angst that women have at being, pulled down at work by being told that, hey, you're succeeding, you're a woman. But all the while you could see the woman, wearing her earrings, she was wearing her this. So the brand was very subtly woven into the story so that you were reminded constantly and subconsciously that this is a jewelry ad and that is woven into the story. So you got to be very careful when you're doing these ads where you have this big emotional stories which bring tears to people's eyes and so on, and then the brand is at the very end saying that, oh, by the way, all these products were ordered on Amazon and what have you. So it is a good point to be really keep in mind that you have to weave the brand into the story, whatever that story is. Same thing, by the way, about sex. People, have all these sexy women and all of that stuff, and then and they put them in the ads and so on, and then people remember the woman. But they don't remember the actual brand. And
exactly.
So, so the same type of thing happens. And this is, by the way, I'm not making all this stuff up. This has all been studied in studies in psychology. So they've done studies and they said, had ads that were sexually charged and what have you. And then they later on go back and say, what was the recall of the brand and so on. And they found that people forgot about the brand and they just remembered the person. Same thing they've noticed in these emotional branding pieces, where sometimes people remember that emotional story and forget the brand. So you've got to be very careful with that as a marketer. That's a very subtle point, and I do cover it in my book.
I see. In fact, Google did a very good ad many years back when there was a man in Delhi. He had a childhood friend in Lahore, and he used to keep talking about him. So yes, the children of the two men, yes, I mean, they get together through Google, So Google
yes,
was in fact, always there. Yeah. So that was
I discussed that ad in detail in my book for these very reasons.
You do. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Arunji. Thank you very much. So it is clarifying lots of things and reaffirming some of the concepts to the campaigns that we have actually witnessed. So that's in a greater sense is the purpose of this leadership conversation, and I can beautifully see how it is evolving, and I'm thankful to you, sir, on that. While we move to the next question, I'll request Lavanya ji to be ready with her question, but I'll raise one which I have with me right now. I have two questions with me. How can neuromarketing be used in banking and financial services sector, BFSI, so to say?
Okay. So just as a point of clarification for people that are not familiar with neuromarketing, neuromarketing is a little different than the topic that it is related to the topic that of cognitive branding, but not necessarily the same thing. It is not the same thing. But neuromarketing is where people have started really focusing on really understanding what's going on in the human brain. So they wire you up with different things, right? So they may put you under a CAT scan, they may do an EEG, they may do all these different types of equipment that can be used. So, for a very typical use is that if you have a television commercial, that you play that on screen, and that meanwhile you wired people with all these sensors, and then you see how different parts of their brain are reacting as they watch the commercial, and from that they can make certain calculations around how your eyeballs are moving, for example, which part of the screen they went to, whether they focused on the right parts of the screen or not. They can see when different parts of your brain light up. So all of that whole arena where these different tools are being used to peer into the human brain is what is called neuromarketing. And the whole idea, if you will, was that, hey, if I could get just a printout of what people are thinking, right? But you never know what everybody is thinking, and you'd love to have a printout of what people are thinking. So can I just put all these wires into you and then just print out everything that was going through your mind? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah. And it's, science is not quite there. So you still have to do all the hard work of really thinking through and trying to understand what people are thinking through notions of psychology. And I believe right now you can get more out of psychology than out of neuromarketing. But nonetheless, I do encourage my clients to use those techniques, not as a replacement, but as something that is part of the mix of understanding how people are reacting to your brand stimulus. When they walk into a store, you can see how they're reacting. Even they're watching your television commercial, so whether that's financial services are very consumer directed. So, when you're in those things, whether you're in the bank, we've done a lot of work in banking and credit cards and so on. And there's a lot of, those are very consumer facing industries. So you can use neuromarketing for sure there, because particularly financial services companies, insurance companies, and so on, they spend a lot of money on advertising to consumers, for example, and hundreds of millions of dollars. So, you really spending that extra bit of money, perhaps on some of these neuromarketing tools, is well worth the amount to just kind of understand people a little better. Because even if your ad becomes 5% better, hey, if you have got $100 million spend, that's $5 million of value right there.
Great. Thank you very much for your advice on that. There's another question, very interesting question that we have. Somebody wants to know, how can street vendors create engaging and memorable brands? I mean, these days we are doing a lot of exercises and research into streetpreneurs and street vendors.
Yeah.
Within the constraints and the restrictions that they have, in India, there are a large number of street vendors. On a daily basis, they transact about 90 to 100 crores of rupees, all put together, and a huge forays into using digital payments is happening. The smallest of the vendors is connected on digital payment apps, the UPI, and therefore they are also customer focused. They are also right there on the street, and they have certain zones. They're called vending zones and non-vending zones, and there's a seasonality to some of these activities, but sometimes there is a cyclical presence, like weekly ones. You have a big heart or a street where all these vendors come and do that. Otherwise, also you have regular street vendors. They appear everywhere with all products actually chipped in. Some of them mobile, some of them stationary. So probably from that background, one is interested to know how we can create engaging and memorable brands, how it can be used by street vendors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that is where when you're talking about street vendors, and assuming they're not tied into some kind of a bigger conglomerate where they are sort of, got thousands of these outlets. If you're just talking about individual street vendors, that is the piece that we didn't discuss today. But, as I mentioned in the book, I talk about brand experiences. And really, it is all about how you create those brand experiences, those individual moments for people that can become very memorable and can settle into their memories. Otherwise, we see thousands of these vendors, we buy Sabzi and all of this stuff from, so many different people, and you may never remember them. But when they create certain special moments for you, then it can become important. So let me just talk about a couple of things there as far as special moments are concerned. One thing is this whole notion that you have probably heard used in marketing called surprise and delight. And what has happened is that when in marketing, you often say that you should deliver what customers expect. But what has happened is that just meeting customer expectation is not enough. So when you go to a store and, you order a Coke and they give you a Coke and you drink the Coke and you come back, well, they just met your expectation. Nothing went wrong. Your Coke didn't explode in your face. You might remember it if it exploded in your face. But anyways, if nothing happens really, if there's no special moment, then you don't remember those things, even though your customer expectations were fully met. So that is where this notion of surprise and delight comes in, which is that you have to create these moments where you actually surprise people in a positive way, because when you do that, those moments get sort of wired into your memory, and it becomes part of that brand experience that I'm talking about. And so people do little things. So, if you the examples that I mentioned in my book are around, for example, waitresses. And waitresses have been at restaurants have been studied to a great deal to see, what increases their tips, what are the things they can do to increase their tips. And that has been studied, over many interactions, but waitresses know these things very specifically. So a small example that I'll give you is that when your check, at the end of the meal, when you get a check, if that check has a smiley face drawn on it by hand, and the person has, written there and said, hey, thank you, Sudhakar, and a smiley face, those waitresses have gotten higher tips. Okay, so just that little piece, and by the way, she can tell it's Sudhakar because you gave your credit card and your name was there. So just personalizing it a little, making that little moment special gives you a higher trip, whatever that is, 10%, 15%, a little bit higher, that makes a difference. They've also found that what matters is, when you go for these meals and you're offered the special of the day, that's very common, by the way, in the Western world. Restaurants have a special of the day and they'll offer it to you, or whatever the main entree is, for example. So it is common for the waiters to come in and very, after a while and ask you, hey, how was that special, or how was that, butter chicken or whatever that you ordered? Because that was the big thing. And they want to reinforce in your brain the part of the meal that was the most special. And when they do that, they get bigger tips. So many different things have been studied about it. In Kahneman's work, he talks about, what is it that we remember about the experiences? And what he found is that if there's a whole experience, that you tend to remember the climax of the experience and how the experience ended. Okay, those are the two things, even if it was like a 3-hour experience, the climax of the experience and how it ended are the parts that define the whole experience. And if you take in a very trivial way the example that I just gave you of this waitress, she's asking you about the meal special because that's the climax of the meal. And then she's ending the meal very nicely with a smile, with this little personal acknowledgement and a thank you. those two things are the things that you remember most in that brand experience. So, I'm maybe deviating a little bit here, but I'm trying to give you an example of how small vendors too can really think about how do they create that special moment when that person is coming there, and how do they create that special ending so that people remember them positively. And that is one of the things that they can do around creating a brand. And don't forget, by the way, all those different things that we were talking about in sensory branding. When you're a small vendor, you have so much opportunity to, expose people to different sounds, different smells, different tastes, and so on. All of those things get wired as part of your brand. The brain is getting all of this stimulation, all of that stuff gets packed in with your brand as one thing. It could just be the sound, it could be just the smell. All those things just get packed in and create that wonderful brand experience that we all look for. So very, very important for small vendors, and very important for large brand marketers also, that whatever those touch points are, where your brand actually meets the consumer, how you design those touch points is all about what brand experience is. And that's really the stuff that we didn't cover today in today's discussion, which is part 2 of my book.
Oh, great. I'm very happy that this question has allowed us to get into a small insight into what is your part 2 of the book. But at the same time, very beautifully, it is enmeshed with the framework that you're talked about, is creating the brand experience, or those special moments which you're talked about, surprise and delight factor, and small opportunities of creating a personalized note. And very beautifully summarized by you, like the whole experience is defined by how the climax of the experience has been and how it really ended. I think these two defining factors talk about the brand experience as a whole. And fantastic. We will pass on these insights to street vendors, because ICFAI is working with street vendors across the country in cities like Gurgaon, Delhi, to Jaipur, to Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Kolkata, and also Dehradun. In all these locations, we are interacting with hundreds and thousands of street vendors to understand if we can make any difference to their earnings, in terms of digital transformation, in terms of marketing tips, in terms of consolidation, capacity building, so on and so forth, apart from what the country by government has already done with respect to policy making, so on and so forth. But we as an educational institution would like to delve deep into this aspect and bring out learnings, not just which are useful for students in their project work or internships, but very useful to the street vendors themselves, and make some difference to the quantum of earnings that they are currently having, and how in future we can create the delta. For example, if they're earning say 5,000-6,000 rupees per day, how it can move up to 10,000 rupees per day. If we can probably do that. We will connect back with you and offline, and I'll write some of these initiatives to you, sir, and share with you what has been our progress at different points in time, and probably you can advise us or give us a few tips in case we are missing out any point in the whole research that we are undertaking. It's going to I'm sure add a lot of value, a rich value to all the stakeholders. We are also partnering with a German NGO on this very project. They are based out of Delhi, this German NGO, and that is overlooking into all these activities. And ICFAI is the partner, the education partner, that actually holds the whole sessions, interacts, and creates design templates for research, and also what is called consultation exercises that we have finished about 2 to 3 consultation exercises in Bengaluru, in Delhi, and we are gearing up for the next consultation exercise in the city of Jaipur. So I will share with you those things, and this response has been particularly useful for us in trying to understand the opportunities of creating those special moments are much more for small businesses and street vendors as well. I think there's a greater hope there. We will try and give some creative solutions also for the benefit of the street vendors. So I'm trying to go a little faster now in terms of these are application oriented questions, like we have applied this to street vendors, we have applied this to BFSI. There's one interesting question that has popped up, and I would like to take that. It is, what is the role of cognitive branding in the area of internal branding, that is for employees, how an organization can deploy cognitive branding to probably appeal to and create higher productivity, engagement, longevity, and higher ownership with the organization. How can they do it with their own employees?
Sure. And I mean, I think I do get that question from time to time as far as, how could these principles be used in employee branding? And I even also get asked about how can this be used in personal branding and what have you, and in marketing yourself. What I would say, obviously my book is really more around consumer branding for products and services, because you have to pick an area. When you write stuff, you gotta make up your mind around what you're going to write on and where your expertise is going to be. But nonetheless, the comment that I would make is that these distinctions that we make between personal branding, employee branding, and product branding, and so on, are distinctions that we make for our own understanding. Our brain is our brain. Our brain doesn't necessarily make those distinctions. It's the same. If you think about what's in your brain, all those cells that are the biologic cells that are there, the neurons that are there, those neurons and all are the same neurons. That same circuitry is processing all of these inputs. And in that sense, the framework itself is useful in all of those situations. And so, with employees also, how do you communicate your brand vibes of your employer brand? How do they feel like, what did I define as vibes? I said vibes are defined as the brand understanding how you feel. So shouldn't the employers also be very sensitive to understanding how their employees feel? Are they feeling like they're respected? Are they feeling like their voices are heard, and so on, right? When an employer brand is able to do that, they will have what I would call brand vibes. Why does it make sense for somebody to work at your company, right? Does it instinctively make sense? If I think about working at the Tatas, is that such a respected brand? Is it a brand that has had so much respect built into, they've been there since our independence. And they've helped to build the country and what have you. So there's a lot of respect that is story and experience and memories that are tied. So when you say to somebody you work at the Tatas, that instinctively makes a lot of sense. Now, you may also make delivery, same way with modern companies. If you say you work at Apple or you work at Google, you get a certain instinctive respect and value out of that. So those types of things are there. Whereas if you are a new employer and you've never existed before, you may have to do a lot more work for people to say, oh, this is why it makes sense for me to work there, because, oh, gee, I'm going to get all these options. And so that's deliberative sense making. So those same types of things that we are talking about apply very much to employer branding. And you can use that pyramid structure that I gave you around brand sense, brand vibes, and brand resolve to really stretch your thinking about how that could apply to your employer brand and internal branding.
Great, sir. Great. I think the framework is really helpful and it is applicable to all kinds of situations that we have to grapple with. And some of these organizations which are the most sought after organizations supposedly to work for, they also initiate activities from time to time with respect to creating their brand perception with the existing employees as well as the future, that is the prospective employers, by creating stories in terms of books, in terms of lectures, in terms of experiential films, so on and so forth. But they do make an effort to talk about all these things, all falling into the framework that you have explained very nicely. For example, Tata's was a point that we are on, and we have seen many of the leaders who are presently working in Tata or who have already worked in Tata in the recent past have published their books and shared their experiences and created a nice perception in the minds of those who are actually not now working with Tata, but are pull towards the value systems and standards of Tata's. So there's a positive disposition of our mind towards their products and businesses at one level. At another level, if ever I get a chance to work with that organization, I would probably not think twice. I think they have become successful in doing that with, of course, a definite activities, initiatives that they have taken up from time to time. So
Yes,
thank you,
yes.
sir.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
That is certainly a generational brand. In fact, it has, Tata's has a generational memory, because as I mentioned, Jamshedji Tata was involved with right after independence of India, with setting up many of the industries and helping the country come alive, which it might never have if the industrial part of the equation also didn't pick up. So it's a generational memory, it's a generational respect that we have for that brand, which certainly communicates something that is more than what you could explain in a two-line brand statement.
Great. Thank you, sir. One last question, we will take it up. I'm assuming that Professor Prasad has no question, but you can disprove me. One last question from the audience is that, sir, TikTok as a brand has been talked about by a US commissioner who said, as a wolf in sheep's clothing, yet in some of the areas it has been able to disrupt most iconic brands like Google in US in particular. Sir, your comments on this? I think they're talking about TikTok and wanting your comments on that.
No, I think, it's kind of two different things. As a brand and as a channel of communication, TikTok is something that has become very important, and there's all kinds of studies that have been performed. But that whole idea of short videos is something that is very important. And I think, again, this whole notion of taking short videos and making them mean something is really tied into being artful and skillful in tapping into people's fantasies and their experiences, because otherwise, the 30 seconds, 40-second video is not going to do anything. It has to stimulate something that you watch and you relate to it. And I think they've been very successful, particularly with the younger generation, in getting ideas around fashion, around lifestyle, and so on. And things take a life of their own, just like I showed you. And people have put these Instagram pictures of my book, which I was surprised to find there. Obviously, they spend a lot of time and to create those pictures and so on, but they do have their own following. So we are seeing all of these micro influencer channels that are springing up. And in fact, what we are discovering is that in the micro influencer world, these medium-sized influencers are actually much more effective than the large-scale influencers. So sometimes you'll have these big stars. We were talking a lot about stars. They have millions of followers, but when you pay the money and the amount of money that you have to pay them, and then you look at how much did your sales actually go up, sometimes you don't quite get the full impact versus getting a lot of these smaller people. So what I mean by that is that sometimes you will get, let's say if I had to get one influencer that had 1 million followers versus I get 100 medium-sized influencers that have 10,000 followers each. If I follow those two different strategies, often it turns out that you get more ROI on your spend with those medium-sized influencers, right? So these mediums are doing particular things. And the reason that happens is that those micro influencers often have a deeper attachment with their followers versus the big influencers who have millions of followers, but many of those followers are not deeply attached, if you will, as far as saying, I'm going to use the product this person uses. So I think some interesting dynamics are emerging in these micro influencer channels. TikTok is one of those. So in that sense, it is a very valuable channel that has emerged. And we as marketers need to embrace these very closely. There's that whole separate issue of how the governments are seeing certain risks with these channels in terms of where is that data going and how is that data being used by different countries as are different countries actually using that data and weaponizing it for political means or whatever else. And by the way, so that's a China versus US problem, but you can see that China has been hard on its own companies because they're concerned about, so for example, they went after Didi, which is the Chinese Uber, right? And they went after that because they figured out, hey, wait a minute, these guys have all the data around where all the government officials are going and taking cars from. So they have a location on and the pattern of travel of all our people. So they're suspicious about their own people. And so they put a stop to Didi. So, these types of things will happen, but nonetheless, it doesn't take away from the intrinsic value of what those brands bring to consumers.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you very much. Is somebody raising hand? I'll still take that, but I have one question which is personal, sir. And that is personal to you, and another question which is personal to us. So the first I will ask what is personal to us, and then I'll come to yours. What is your advice or suggestion to create a cognitive branding initiatives for an education brand like ours, say higher education space that we are in, and the matrix of competitions that we have in higher education space in India. So what are the one or two things that one can really try out in terms of cognitive branding in education space?
So I think, again, in the case, whether it's education or anything else, I think even in education, you have to sort of do that research. And in all of these cases, you have to really do that research to understand what are those beliefs people have about a good education, right? So people may, because people go through various experiences, and what are the beliefs that people have? And this in India, of course, we are unique in that we have a rich tradition of having gurus, right? We own that term. That's guru is kind of like a brand which India owns, I would say. But we have a rich tradition, and we have particular ways in which people believe about good education. And so I think you have to get into that research about understanding what are those pre-wired beliefs that people already have in their minds, because it's very difficult to change people's mind. We are all very stubborn, and and why do I say that? I say we are all very stubborn because remember what I said, which is that all these experiences that we're having, all these fantasies they're stored in our brain, but they're stored in our brain in biologic networks. And you cannot change biology that easily. That is why, whatever beliefs you have, your neurons and all those things have sort of biologically changed to forge those connections, and changing those is very difficult. So that's why you don't want to try and change those things. You want to try and understand and delve into what people's beliefs are around good education. Do they believe in, for example, having star power? Do they believe like there should be some well-known gurus that are associated with it, and what have you? And then do they believe that, if the name of certain institutions is associated with it, that it's a good education? Do they believe that if you have associations with foreign universities, that that is going to do foreign speakers and so on, that's going to do certain things for you? And people have that. Look at how many people are going applying for degrees in unknown schools in UK and this and that. A lot of that happens because people have this deep-seated belief that, hey, having a certificate from abroad is going to be helpful to my career. And people pay a lot of money for universities that I haven't heard of, where they go for different kinds of education. That's because they have that deep-seated belief that something from outside is better. But I don't know, that's just one example of a kind of a belief. But what are these different beliefs? And the idea is that you don't have to fight it. If that's what they believe, that's what they believe. you try to figure out how can you align with that belief. How do you get that exposure? If they believe that exposure from the West makes something better, well, how do you wire that exposure from the West into the? I'm not necessarily saying that's what your answer. I'm just saying, as a theoretical answer to your question, that delving into those beliefs around what consumers can think of as a great education is what you need to connect with, because that's already in their brains.
Great. It's going to be very, very useful. We have jotted down the response, and there are suggestions that you have made on this to understand, conduct research and understand what are the pre-wired beliefs and align with those beliefs. It is also connecting with the original framework that you have given, but with respect to higher education, the beliefs like gurus are supposed to be great. And if you are associated with some of these international or no national gurus, international universities as an association, so on and so forth. I think some of those aspects we can focus on.
And I think that also expands your market, because I think in India, the whole notion of guru, for example, is associated with the core notion that there are certain things that you cannot understand. There are certain things that you cannot learn without the guidance of a guru.
Okay.
Right. So in that sense, you guys as an educational brand being something akin to a guru is something that sort of makes its position as inevitable, as indispensable by being that role of the guru. You know what I'm saying? It's
Absolutely.
That is what we Indians believe.
How can we create an imagery and a belief that we are indispensable, they can not do without us, is a very, very strong, tangible suggestion that you have given. It's an actionable recommendation, actually. And I think we will work on it, sir. And it's been very, very useful. Now, the question about you is this. Why is it Cerenti marketing? Let me guess, and I may be 100% wrong. Cerenti is jumbled as center, and there is I towards the end, which is written in a small letter. Therefore, the smart, you keep the customer who is the center of all these things, and he is smart, he or she is smart, and you provide all solutions to that. And therefore, your strategic marketing consulting group has this ethos. Tell me I'm wrong, sir.
No, you're not actually. That's a very interesting interpretation, and it sort of certainly gives me also things to think about. I think when we were setting up the company name Cerenti, we had both brand positioning concerns as well as practical concerns. So the brand positioning concerns, because we're a consulting outfit, we wanted to sort of draw on this idea of cerebral, if you will. So you see that stem of that word in our brand, and the idea was this whole notion of action through wisdom. So that was kind of the notion that we put in there. The practical considerations were we wanted a name that we could get a URL for. These days you can't really get a URL for anything that you want. All the words were taken, and that's not just true now, but 20 years back when we founded the company. So we wanted something that could be there. We also wanted a 7-letter word, because in the United States the phone numbers are 7-letter. So we have, for example, a toll-free number which is 855 Cerenti, or fax number 844 Cerenti. So there are all those practical considerations, and there is the philosophical or the brand positioning considerations. And you as a practical marketer, you have to take all of these things into account and not end up with some name that later on you say, oh, now I can't get a phone number for it.
Great, sir. Thank you. Thanks for that insight of the considerations that you have made with respect to selection of your brand name or your organization's name. Fantastic. Professor Prasad, do you have any comment to make before I summarize?
I have a question. It is more related to the execution part. And while working in organizations, most of the bosses would be, as you rightly mentioned, they would be, they would have understood the traditional emotional functional approaches of marketing, and many of these things are new. Into curriculum itself, it is not got into the way it should be got into. So under such circumstances, what would you advise team members to do in order to adopt cognitive marketing techniques?
Right, right. So I would say, this is a question of now versus the future. And in some organizations, the future is here today. And in other organizations, it isn't. And so I do think that, you should really go through the branding 101 courses and so on, for students and so you should really take those to heart and learn those techniques. And those haven't become irrelevant. It's just that with cognitive branding, we are saying that there are more things that you can do. So that's why I refer to it as advanced branding, because it is a level above that. But most of the organizations that you're going to go and going to be working in are going to be doing branding 101. So you should go and learn those basic things about product differentiations, around what is a value proposition, what is functional branding, what is emotional branding. All those things are traditional things, and they're not completely wrong. I don't want to imply that. And so you should learn those things. It's just that those things have been ignoring what has happened in advances in neuroscience, advances in cognitive psychology, advances in social anthropology and behavioral science and so on. And those things will be very commonplace in organizations in the future. So you should do both. And I think find bridges to connect both the old and the new. And like I said, one of the messages here always has been that people are stubborn. People believe what they believe, and it's going to take time to change those beliefs. So don't try to do it overnight. Study these things. Use this, if you will, as a way to expand your mind, which is why I earlier said that, the way I tell people to read my book is to read only one chapter at a time, because there are many new ideas in every chapter. And if you go through it very quickly, you'll miss most of it. And so really the question is, look at it and try to apply it to the situations that you're facing, and then find a way to explain it to your organization, right? It has to make sense to them. Don't say, hey, we should do this because this book says we should do this. You should be able to explain that, look, this is why this thing is making sense. This is why it should be tested. This is how it could be better and an enhancement to our brand. So yeah, take it slow. Don't try to shove these things down anybody's throat.
Thank you, sir. I think it does connect to the new venture idea. Take a pain point, see how you can apply one of these things, and then try to see how that can be invested into. Thank you very much.
Like I said, you should use these to. What happens is that whenever you're working on a branding project, you are looking at different ideas, right? And then you're going to do some research and pick one of those ideas as your go forward idea around your brand positioning. The best way to use these ideas is to expand that list of ideas. So you use the traditional method to make your list, but then use this method to make that list even bigger. And that is very important, because whenever you do quant research, the qualitative research that precedes quant research is very important, because if certain ideas don't come up in your qual research, then you will obviously not have the opportunity to test them in your quant, right? So these are methods that you should use to expand your horizon, to expand the list of ideas that you have, so that when you actually go into quant research, you are testing more ideas, and then whatever wins.
Thank you, sir. I think it is quite practicable, and I think we'll have to see how we can get to that. Back to Professor Rao.
Great. Sir, thank you very much. We all have enjoyed this conversation. It's a brilliant way of looking into next level of branding, and you have explained very clearly to us, and it is much better than reading any book, actually. So we are having that benefit now. However, we will read this book, we will buy this book and keep it in our libraries as well. We have 20 campuses across the country, so we'll buy books for all the campuses. So definitely we need those books. We need to learn these things in the manner that you have explained. That one, it is path-breaking research based on experience with various brands over years of testing, real-world experience used into that, and then proposed some theories, and the way you can approach branding is what you have actually explained to us. That's so beautiful. It is disruptive sometimes and not disruptive because there is an existing perception of the word disruption. Any technology that brings disruption or any new product that brings disruption has considerably obliterated the other products or other approaches or other technologies. So here it is not that. Here, the product branding or the functional branding vis-a-vis the emotional branding and how one can evolve into and choose the cognitive branding does not obliterate the other two. Cognitive branding probably weighs in these initial steps of the initial opportunities of your functional benefits of harping on emotional benefits very well into your research, and probably brands can get into a level of cognitive branding beautifully. And therefore, from that point of view, it is not disruption, at the same time path breaking, and very interesting for us to apply. There are several actionable recommendations across sectors and across organizations if this framework is understood properly. I think those three visors that you have mentioned in terms of the brand vibes, brand resolve, and the brand sense makes a lot of sense to the practitioners in branding. And it is at one level very academic. If you really look into the kind of examples that you have taken and the frameworks that you have created, it looks on the face of it very academic. But when you have explained it, it appeared to us that it is a practitioner's delight, but one has to go carefully about it, as you have explained in the last point as well. We need to have all the options laid out and keep considering those options and take a decision that is going to be a rich decision, probably by using all these techniques and tools. A fantastic journey of listening to you, and some of the examples and the videos that you have shared, it has actually brought alive the entire concept in front of our eyes. They've been extremely useful, sir. And the interactions with some of these participants, apart from what they have asked, they have raised a few questions, and that also have clarified many other questions which we left unaddressed, but it is addressed in a way when you have answered those questions. So we restricted to those questions only. Therefore, it has more or less taken care of all the queries. 95% of the queries have been addressed in the end. What is interesting is that the takeaways that we have, those very it looks like small takeaways, but they are very, very useful. For example, in the areas of influencer branding, we need to focus on how these big influencers we can go wrong with sometimes, and our investment versus return for the particular brand and for the particular campaign, we will have to always assess. Some of the medium-sized influencers can be extremely useful, and especially for regional brands, probably we can tap into those medium-sized or micro influencers, depending on this thing. The applications for small businesses and street vendors have been particularly useful, and one can try out some initiatives on that aspect as well. And the third and the most important thing is, even if there is a rock star endorsing your brand, make sure that your brand is bigger than the star who is endorsing that particular brand. And therefore, always go back to the essence of what your brand is all about. Some of these fleeting moments or opportune marketing techniques that we use, probably we need to rise above and quickly reclaim the essence of the brand through various other initiatives, and continue to appeal to the customers that we are serving and that we want to actually do that. But this branding exercise and all these examples that we have gone through your own experience of consulting those brands, is that you will never be standing still. I think that remained etched in my mind that there's a lot happening. This notion is not going to go away. Brands and marketers will be doing something extremely meaningful if they focus on branding as an activity. I mean, that's the core, and that's the larger pie of the entire activity that the organization undertakes. So these benefits and many other takeaways that you have given are immensely useful to us. And some of the final aspects that you have talked about, how brands address the harbored fantasies. I think the examples also have been very useful, like addressing diversity issues, addressing the issues that people don't talk about, addressing how some people would like to just go and do it because it takes care of a large, silent population and their concerns. And therefore, the brands will have to stand for them through the advertisements or through the messages that they prepare through our films and through their stars. For example, somebody refused to stand up for singing national anthem. I think that star has been made a star of the campaign, and this brand stands for those silent majority or minority of people, and relatable diversity associated with that is a beautiful point how Nike has raised. I think all these are examples and practices of cognitive branding, and this is wonderful, sir. So thank you so much on behalf of Professor Prasad, myself, and the entire ICFAI group, and all the participants who have joined today from various parts of the country and abroad. I would like to wholeheartedly thank you for this gyan and for this time and involvement and expertise, sir.
Oh, no, it was my real honor to be on this panel with you both and with your esteemed audience. For people that are interested in these types of things, they can go and sign up for my blog on sandeepdayal.com if they like to. Periodically, I write articles about different campaigns that are going on. So yes, yes, indeed, thank you so much. And I apologize for keeping you waiting. In the beginning of the show, there was a little bit of confusion in my mind, but nonetheless, I tremendously enjoyed interacting with you on this panel, and wish you all the best with all your future ventures.
Thank you, sir. We are holding these conversations every Friday in the evening, India time. We have been introduced to you by Professor Vidhu Mathur. We are extremely thankful. Professor Vidhu Mathur is our esteemed faculty member at ICFAI Business School, Jaipur. So it is through him, it is because of him we are connected to you. I want to express on record my gratitude to Professor Vidhu Mathur. Thank you, Professor, and thanks for joining. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be with you again next Friday on 29th of July at 4 p.m. with Ms. Suhasini Haidar. This is going to be about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the impact on the global economy and what are the lessons for India. I think we are going to talk about that and listen to yet another leader next Friday. Till then, keep browsing and visiting sandeepdayal.com blog, and you will understand more about cognitive branding, and you will enjoy how we have been doing certain things knowingly, largely unknowingly as well. And this world of cognitive branding is going to be very, very interesting for all of us. Happy learning, and see you next Friday. Thank you all. Happy weekend.